to leadership positions in this republic. We seek guidance to treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberations in so just and faithful a manner as to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of our country and of those whose interests you have committed to our charge. Amen.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair.
Honorable members, I wish to draw your attention to the fact that there's a supplementary order paper which has been circulated, and that's the one we shall be using. I also wish to, honorable senators, the Commission on Revenue Allocation, CRA, is an independent commission set up under Article 215 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. Its core mandate is to recommend the basis for equitable sharing of revenues raised nationally between the national and the county governments and among other governments. The Senate leadership, in partnership with CRA, have organized for a breakfast meeting between the two institutions for the purpose of discussing the third generation revenue sharing formula. The meeting is scheduled to be held tomorrow, Wednesday, 25th July 2018 at Radisson Blue Hotel, Nairobi, from 7 a.m. I invite and urge all honorable senators to plan to attend this important meeting. I thank you. I also have a brief communication. I would like to acknowledge the presence in the public gallery this afternoon of visiting students and teachers from Kolanya Girls Boarding School, Busia County. In our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming visitors to Parliament, I extend a warm welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate and on my own behalf, wish them a fruitful visit. I thank you. Next order.
Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions. Order number 5, papers. Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 7, statements. Order number 8, the Care and Protection of Older Members of Society Bill, Senate Bills number 17 of 2018, first reading. A bill for an act of Parliament to give effect to Article 57 of the Constitution, to provide a framework for the care of older members of society, to establish a framework for the empowerment and protection of the elderly, and the maintenance of their well-being, safety and security, and for connected purposes. Order number 9, the Retirement Benefits (Deputy President and Designated State Officers) Amendment Bill, Senate Bills number 2 of 2018, second reading, division.
I direct that the bell be rung for 5 minutes.
Irrigation schemes. And I think and believe that once we have Senator Mutula Kilonzo Jr.'s bill has gone through and we are able to fix our boundaries, then we can be able even to have inter-county irrigation schemes. Mr. Speaker, again, within this particular bill, there is a provision where research institutions are supposed to be established so that we can be able to understand how the seeds are growing and what really requires to be changed here and there. And I think with the irrigation scheme, research institute, our counties promote also participation of the stakeholders. And once we have, Mr. Speaker, the bill on public participation that has been brought to it's before the House, we can be able to have proper involvement of the stakeholders in this particular bill that actually seeks to establish proper irrigation schemes in our country. Mr. Speaker, land tenure system, we find that most of these irrigations, some of them, they don't have title deeds. But one of the things, when I looked at the report of the National Assembly of the committee, members of public were proposing if those schemes could have title deeds that can enable them to get credit facilities from institutions so that they can increase their yields. And I think this is a really important point that we need to consider in terms of the amendment of this particular bill. Mr. Speaker, once we have this bill becomes an act, then we can be able also to review the policies that we already have in place and strengthen it so that it can effectively serve our country. Mr. Speaker, I think for me, it's really important for us to have this bill, and it's timely in terms of us having a proper legal mechanisms in place to manage our irrigation schemes, because if we don't have that, then we are still going to cry issues of relief, issues of drought, issues of land tenure system that is affecting our country for a very long time. Mr. Speaker, again, one of the things that were proposed in the public hearing report that I've looked at, the issues of the usage of the clean water for the purpose of domestic use. Because you will find that within irrigation scheme, Mr. Speaker, chemicals are used in terms of spraying the products. Unfortunately, that has to be provided within an irrigation scheme where members of those schemes can be able to access clean water for the purpose of domestic use. Again, if you look at the Act, Mr. Speaker, it provides for dispute resolution mechanisms in terms of conflict between the users association within irrigation schemes at different levels. And I think, Mr. Speaker, this will be able to help communities to resolve their issues instead of, running to courts, and also making that the irrigation schemes that are unoperational. Mr. Speaker, we need to provide for also a provision that will be able to protect the farmers to get proper crops to be able to irrigate, to plant within those irrigation schemes. Mr. Speaker, personally, I think having come from a county that has several irrigation schemes, as I've said earlier, those irrigation schemes, they are not benefiting the local communities. Government is pumping in a lot of money, but unfortunately, the schemes, like for example, the Malkadaka one I talked about, it has been in operation since 1978. Up to date, money is pumped in, but the scheme is not helping the community. And I think once we have this bill, Mr. Speaker, we'll be able to help our communities to make sure that it has assisted them in terms of their livelihood. Mr. Speaker, finally, I think I want to say that we must have M&E mechanisms in place within this particular bill to be able to help our farmers how the irrigation schemes are supposed to be evaluated. And I think this is a step forward in terms of ensuring that how we are progressing with our irrigation schemes. Mr. Speaker, I believe this particular bill, once it goes through, it will be able to help our communities, and it will be able to help our country in terms of improvement of GDP. And I'm requesting members to support this bill so that we can be able to have it implemented and also establish regulations that can be able to govern this. And again, also amend the relevant policy that governs this particular bill once it has gone through. Mr. Speaker, without further ado, I'll be able to request, I'm requesting Senator Mutula Kilonzo Jr. to second this bill. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Senator Junior.
Thank you, Speaker. I was waiting for you to call me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this bill. Mr. Speaker.
All the money for irrigation is in Nairobi. How the county is going to set up irrigation schemes, it is very expensive to set up an irrigation scheme. The amount of money we give to counties is not enough to set up an irrigation scheme in any county. And if the board that is going to deal with irrigation is all Nairobi-based national government, who is going to imagine that Tana River requires an irrigation scheme if Tana River is not represented? These are the big issues, Mr. Speaker. And I want to urge members, We represent the people of this country from the counties and their governments. Let's not steamroll through legislation that is clawing back devolution, that is undermining devolution. Food security, food production, food storage is in the counties. And you have somebody in Treasury holding a magic pen deciding whether to put any money on any irrigation or not. That's what we are giving to the country in this bill. Members, it's up to us to pass a legislation that will stand the test of time and that will help the people who send us here. Mr. Speaker, with those remarks, I have a qualified support. I want to see what the committee stage will bring on this bill.
Senator Cheriot Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for giving me this chance to make my contributions and share my thoughts about what I think about this bill, the Irrigation Bill 2017, National Assembly Bill number 46 of 2017, a bill whose history we are quite familiar with, and we know the journey it has traveled. Yet, no matter the opposition and the thoughts that senators shared during the time it was first brought to the House, the drafters and those who have the interest of seeing this piece of legislation go through have still not taken time to consider our views and what we think about it. However, all is not lost because I listened to the mover of the bill, the good Senator for Isiolo, Senator Fatuma Dulo, where she spoke and said, like we all know procedurally for all bills, that after the second reading, when this bill is committed to the committee, what are the thoughts that we as senators have shared that the committee will be able to accommodate and consider, so that we don't get to a state where it appears as if Parliament was made for the executive. I have always held the strong view that it is the executive that was made for Parliament. Parliament is a meeting of all Kenyans. Each afternoon, the 47 million Kenyans gather, for example, in this House, through their 67 representatives here. And therefore, by any stretch of imagination, it cannot be the work of Parliament to do the work of executive. Rather, it is the opposite. It is the executive to do our work and inculcate our thoughts and ideas, because when we speak on behalf of the people of Kenya that we represent. The thoughts that I share, for example, about irrigation bill are not my own. I have thought about through this bill and see how it will benefit the 1 million plus residents of the county that I represent in this House, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, there are many things that I agree with in this bill. Because for sure, when you see the struggle that we have continued to have in terms of our water resource management, and even the whole sector of agriculture and large-scale irrigation, which we know will be the only answer to the perpetual farming challenge that this country continues to face, it does not mean that because we have a legislation that is before us, we hurry it as if by passing this bill, famine shall become history in this country. No matter how hungry a person is, you cannot serve them 97% food and 3% poison and hope that because they've been hungry, they will eat it anyway. The truth is that they will die. There are parts of this bill, Mr. Speaker, which my conscience will not allow me to support it in the context that it is. And I hope that when the committee sits down to consider the views And I hope members of the committee are taking note of the issues that are being raised by Senator one after the other in considering and remember how keenly and how important it is, because we may never get another opportunity to raise some of these concerns. Mr. Speaker, I have earlier spoken, because moving on to Section 6 of this bill, on the importance of this development, management and regulation of irrigation, and some of the duties that the Cabinet Secretary in charge will be doing, is that there will be, they are supposed to send a report to Parliament annually from time to time as may be necessary on the state of and the needs for irrigation, development and management in this country. It is not for a lack of another legislation for this not to have happened. In the current statute in its existence, this is supposed to be happening, but still, I can remember for the number of years that I have been in this house, that I have never seen such a report submitted before us. What we know of, for example, the infamous irrigation scheme of Kulalu, Galana Kulalu. We have never, apart from the reports that we read in the media and what we hear about the misadventure by National Irrigation Board, there is nothing that members of this house, for example, can say they can use as a basis when making a decision whether to support such a legislation or not. And therefore, the question at the top of our minds is, if it has not been for lack of laws and legislation that this reporting to Parliament has not been happening, why is it that somebody wants to cheat us now, that if you pass this legislation, they will now be bringing us reports and telling us on the state of irrigation programs that are being done in this country? It is upon the committee to think creatively, because it has been established that human beings respond either to the carrot or to the stick. I think we have offered too many carrots and people no longer respond to them. Therefore, can we consider in law to offer the sticks? And by that I mean to consider what will be the remedial measures that will be put in this bill, such that if the Cabinet Secretary does not file the answers that legislatures and representatives of the people continue to have about irrigation programs that are run in this country, what is it that is going to happen to them? Otherwise, if you continue to propose very good drafted legislation as this, there's nothing that we are solving. We're just becoming, slowly but slowly, a conveyor belt of executive orders and not bills as was thought about in the establishment of parliaments. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I am worried also under reporting, because it speaks in Part I of collaboration with county governments to gather information and database on irrigation development and management, including data on irrigation of water supplies, demands, project, and such on and such forth, Mr. Speaker. What is the specificity of this collaboration? What is it that will trigger a cabinet secretary, for example, to think through and say, I have to go to Kericho and meet with the county government of Kericho and establish what are their irrigation needs? Otherwise, when you give a blank check to a cabinet secretary, what is it that will stop them from only considering maybe their county of birth or where their wife or girlfriend comes from, and that becomes the end of it? We are representative of counties. Therefore, if there is any ambiguity in law, as this one appears, I will be more glad if it was specified that this collaboration has to be specific to each county, such that I am assured, as I pass this, that the cabinet secretary will give me a report and will form a collaboration with the county government of Kericho and identify our irrigation needs. Otherwise, when you give a blank check, chances are it is subject to abuse, as has been the case. We have seen large water dams that are being built, for example. In counties, I do not consider, for example, that there are counties that need dams more than the others. But for sure, given the scarcity of resources that we have in this country, it would have been more prudent for us to be told that these are the resources that are available, and therefore this is what is going to be done with each specific county. I do not want to lose my point by opening up debate and saying a specific county, County X, for example, has more water irrigation projects than they deserve. My point will be lost. The only thing that I plead with the committee is that we need the specificity of how irrigation needs will be identified in each and every county. That is extremely important for me. Mr. Speaker, as I move part 3 of where we are establishing the National Irrigation Authority, anybody that has had me make contribution each and every time we are setting up an authority knows that I hate this obsession with setting up authorities, then headquartering them in Nairobi. Each and every authority that is brought to this house, we are told, shall be headquartered in Nairobi. Mr. Speaker, what is this obsession with Nairobi? I love this city. I was born here. I have nothing personal against Nairobi. But when shall we ever develop other parts of this country? If every authority that you are bringing here and you want to support, we want it to be headquartered in Nairobi. How will counties like Turkana ever benefit? How will my own county, Kericho, enjoy services and see Kenyans of diverse walks and backgrounds if every time we have an authority, we want to restrict it? A few months ago, before the Committee of Finance, we are continuing to fund requests to build county headquarters for counties that don't have headquarters. It is because of this scarcity of proper thought in government that you have specific counties that do not have a headquarter. It would have been more prudent even for us to think and say, because we are all Kenyans and we understand that different parts of this country have not developed equally, then the prudent thing to do is to say, instead of setting aside 500 or 600 million for Nyandarua to build their county headquarters, let us give them 2 or 3 billion and build a proper raised government building that shall headquarter, that shall serve as their county headquarter and also serve as a headquarter for some of this authority. That is prudent use of financial resources. But you want to fund each project individually, and the motivation for that is known. And therefore, because I've spoken about this for so many other bills that have been brought before this house and no one appears to be listening, I want to promise that if it comes back before this house, even for just this specific challenge alone, I will not support this bill, Mr. Speaker. Because we have to be serious. Other people are planning their countries properly. And you visit, you see how urban regeneration is a modern concept that is being adopted world over. Yet you want to continue to cringe and squeeze in Nairobi, a county that was made for 4 million people, now housing close to 10 million people, because of this poverty of thought that you're witnessing here. Mr. Speaker, as also the challenges that in my thinking, because we are establishing an authority, and at the back of our minds, as somebody has reminded us, we need to consider and question, what is it that National Irrigation Board was not able to achieve that we think by introducing and renaming it to National Irrigation Authority, we shall be able to achieve. Part 8.2, while speaking about the authority, it is still not clear in my mind when they say that this authority shall be responsible for development of irrigation infrastructure, how it sits with existing water services board. For example, the Tana Athi Water Services Board, Athi Water, Rift Valley, Lake Victoria. this existing water services board that over the years have gathered institutional capacity to be able to carry these irrigation programs. But now that you're setting up another authority, what will be the collaboration? What is the cost implication to the taxpayer where you have moribund parastatals and you're creating new authorities without looking into keenly to ensure how do you marry the two, for example? It will have been more interesting, and the committee should be able to report back and give answers to this House for purposes of ease of understanding for us as legislators, to know that when we pass this bill and this authority is set up, it shall not render the now existing water services board and how they will be collaborating to carry out development of these irrigation projects that has been talked about. Mr. Speaker, I also take greatest exception with this sort of, I don't want to call it Stone Age, but for every other authority that is being brought unto us, we are told you must have a representative from Treasury, you must have a representative from Irrigation Department. What is this obsession? What specific skill do they bring on the table? What is it? Are there angels that are in Treasury who must sit in every government department for us to feel that you are properly represented? People are just earning allowances and do not add anything useful to us. And therefore, it is time as legislators that we take a radical shift in terms of how we consider bills that are brought to this House. Otherwise, the drafters of these bills that are brought to this House will always know that, don't worry, there are 67 rubber stamps that will just pass on this bill. Reject it and send it back to them so that they consider and think creatively. Let people earn their salary. Otherwise, it's unfair to the people that we represent. I have never been more convinced to reject a government bill than I am if the thoughts that I have shared this afternoon are not taken into consideration. With those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I want to say I conditionally support. Thank you.
Senator Kajwang Moses Otieno.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend my voice to this bill that is before us today. And Mr. Speaker, I wish to put forth some arguments that will determine the position I'm taking on this particular bill. And the position I'm taking on this bill is that we cannot support and enact this bill as it is. And I start, Mr. Speaker, with a definition of the word irrigation. And if you look at the bill, the drafters attempt to define irrigation as means or any process other than by natural precipitation which supplies water to crops or any other cultivated plants or livestock or aquaculture and desired forest trees. And the drafters of the bill have chosen a much more complicated definition of irrigation. If you look at the Oxford Dictionary, it says that irrigation is a supply of water to land or crops to help growth. The reason why I linger on the irrigation, on the definition of irrigation, is to be able to ask ourselves, why do we undertake irrigation? And in my mind, we undertake irrigation for purposes of food production. And if you look at the 4th schedule of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, the duties of the national government and county governments have been laid out very clearly. And agriculture, there is no doubt that that is a function of county governments. And national government has got the duty of agricultural policy. Mr. Speaker, we do not do irrigation so that we can set up dams where children can swim, or set up ponds where we can do funny things and plant grass. We do irrigation so that we can enhance food production. We do irrigation for food security. And therefore, any action on irrigation or any responsibility on irrigation must lie with the level of government that has been allocated the role of agriculture in the Constitution, and that must be the county government. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill, it says it repeals Cap 347 that established the National Irrigation Board. But it does more than that, because it takes National Irrigation Board and rebrands it to National Irrigation Authority. But what it does further is to provide very great powers to the Cabinet Secretary responsible for matters to do with irrigation. In fact, sometimes you get the impression that this bill has been crafted to bring or to provide a job description for someone who was appointed to the cabinet and has no idea what he was supposed to be doing. And that job description is coming from this particular bill. I would not support a bill or piece of legislation that attempts to take away powers or duties that should be exercised by county governments to take it back to the centers. Mr. Speaker, past irrigation ventures have had mixed success. Senator Wetangula has talked about Galana, and we were promised that 1 million acres would be put under irrigation. At the end of the day, and after millions of shillings or billions of shillings had been spent, only 5,000 acres had been put under irrigation, with only 118,000 bags of maize coming out of Galana. Mr. Speaker, it is a duty of this parliament to investigate the amounts of money and to investigate what went into Galana Kulanu. Because right now, if you go to its website, you are told that the current status is that it has been suspended because validation had not been concluded. How do we go into 1 million project, 1 million acre project, with a validation exercise that had not been done? This is a scandal, and it is a scandal that has happened at the excuse of providing food to the poor. We have other irrigation projects, and I see some in my neighboring county of Kisumu, but in my county of Homa Bay, there is one called Oluch Kimira Irrigation Project. Mr. Speaker, this project was conceived in 2006 through funding by the Africa Development Bank. It was meant to take 6 years to completion. We are in 2018, 12 years down the line. This project has not been completed, and it has not been handed over to the county governments. In fact, Mr. Speaker, this project has consumed 4 billion Kenya shillings. And with 4 billion Kenya shillings, if you see the channels that have been constructed across Homa Bay County, from Karachuonyo to Rangwe to Homa Bay constituency, these channels are now being used by livestock owners to water their cattle. And they're being used by young men and women to wash their clothes. They are being used by people who are putting up construction projects to draw water for their construction project. And this is what is going to happen if you are going to make irrigation a national government thing, because they will come up with ideas that are conceived up in the skies. And when it comes to implementation, where there is need for ownership, that then will not happen. That is the example of Oluch Kimira, a beautiful project on paper. But in terms of changing the lives of the people of Homa Bay, it has not had that effect. You have seen some anecdotal evidence or reports coming up that some people are able to harvest vegetables even during the dry season. But Oluch Kimira was not brought in. You do not spend 4 billion shillings for some peasant kind of economy mainstreaming. You want to transform the lives of peasants so that they can move from subsistence farming to commercial farming. What Oluch Kimira has done is to leave the peasants where they are and to make them plant little patches of vegetables which they can pluck, and yet they were supposed to be commercial producers of vegetables. And that is why decisions on irrigation need to be taken at the ground level. Mr. Speaker, about a month ago, I visited West Pokot County, where the governor of West Pokot, who is a former senator, Professor Lonyangapuo, has decided to use county funds to implement irrigation projects. And we went to corners of West Pokot where they had never planted maize before. Mr. Speaker, we were able to roast maize and eat maize grown on irrigation schemes at the counties. That is the local problem, local solution approach that this bill must be amended to reflect. There is no way that the national government would have thought about the people of West Pokot and implemented an irrigation project in those corners that we visited in West Pokot. The best approach to irrigation and the way to achieve 1 million acres in 5 years has been said by speakers before me. Allow counties, give them resources, give them enabling legislation, and give them targets. And say that 20 counties are given a target of putting 50,000 acres under irrigation. Within 1 year, you have achieved 1 million acres. And Mr. Speaker, even if you stagger that over a period of 5 years, you'll be able to achieve your 1 million acre under irrigation faster, more efficiently than the consolidated Galana project. Mr. Speaker, as we look at a bill on irrigation, we must also ask ourselves, what is the role of water masses like Lake Victoria as far as irrigation is concerned? Those of us who come from the shores of Lake Victoria, we are told we cannot use the waters of the lake to irrigate our lands. Why? Because the white man, when he came to Africa, he signed a treaty so that Egypt had the first preference on the use of the waters of Lake Victoria. What the people in Egypt don't know is that because of the shenanigans going on in Kenya, the destruction of water catchment towers, the politicization of Mau Forest, very soon there will be no Lake Victoria to talk about. Because Lake Victoria gets its water from the water towers, which Mau is one of the most significant. And so even that treaty that was put in place that stops us from using the waters of Lake Victoria, it should not be the most important thing on the table. The most important thing should be how to safeguard and how to protect and how to conserve Lake Victoria. But even when we conserve Lake Victoria, we must be allowed to use the waters of Lake Victoria as a matter of first priority, not Egypt using the waters of Lake Victoria as a matter of first priority. Mr. Speaker, we must look into some of these colonial agreements which have been renewed over time and make sure that they are working for our people. They are not working for a colonial legacy that left us poorer than we ought to have been. And so, Mr. Speaker, there is need to have some exhaustive thinking on this particular bill. This bill, if you are going to set up an authority and to define functions, the bulk of the functions as far as execution is concerned must go to county governments. Unless we are saying we are approaching irrigation so that we can have big swimming pools for people to swim in this country. But as long as irrigation underpins food production, that responsibility must be given to counties, and we must have a situation where Senate and governors sit together and come up with a piece of legislation that satisfies everybody. Mr. Speaker, the budget that we have allocated to the Ministry for Irrigation and Water, and I wish that Senate had the power to look at those sectoral budgets, because billions of shillings are being allocated to a ministry sitting in Nairobi for functions that should be devolved. We should continue pushing, and through the Finance Committee, even if they are going to be conditional allocations, because we have a problem that started from the initiation of Devolution, the issue of costing. How were functions costed? And you'd find that probably in costing, we assume that irrigation would be conducted by the national government. And yet that function has been assigned, the function of food production has been assigned to county governments. We have too many conditional grants, I do agree. But this is an area where we must find a way of channeling the money that goes to the ministry to go to the counties, so that county governments can develop irrigation schemes and county governments can put money into the problems that they understand at the local level. Finally, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of existing national irrigation schemes, this bill proposes that the authority that has been created will continue to manage them and will manage any other public irrigation scheme that has been created. Mr. Speaker, this matter must be looked into, because similar to the debate on sugar, where there is an argument that county governments must now be involved in sugar mills, in their privatization, and in their welfare, we cannot say that the national irrigation schemes shall be transferred as they are to this new authority that we are creating. There has to be some conversation to see which ones can be managed by the county and which ones can remain as national government projects. Mr. Speaker, I therefore wish to state that this is not a bill that I will support in its current form, and I want to encourage other senators that if our duty as captured in Article 96(1) of the Constitution is true, that our duty is to defend and protect the interests of counties and their governments, then we cannot be the Senate that sat while the function of food production was taken away from county governments and taken back to the national government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Halake Abshiro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to add my voice to the debate on this bill, the National Assembly Bill number 46 of 2017, the irrigation bill. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if I'm standing to support. I support any framework of, this House is here to make legislation, and therefore any legislative framework is of course to be supported and to be taken forward, but I'm not sure this bill is one of those that I would support. The Irrigation Bill 2017, first of all, is a misnomer. When I look at just the definition and even just the authority that's to manage this irrigation bill, maybe this bill should have been called the Irrigation Schemes Bill. Because irrigation is much wider in my view, and in my, I'm not really an irrigation expert, but is much wider than what is contained in this bill. This bill's scope is very narrow, and it does just describe irrigation in this country as some scheme of irrigation, as opposed to a broader function that looks at different aspects of irrigation. For instance, one thing that is largely absent, and perhaps I may have missed as I was reading through this bill, is just the management of water for informal irrigation by communities. I don't know if irrigation is just about some big schemes that government has put in place with an authority that manages it, that has some money that's put to it, that disenfranchises communities and therefore then loads over communities with every aspect, or if irrigation is much broader to include even management of water and water sources that also facilitate, support, and encourage communities, even in the informal irrigation that communities engage in. Mr. Speaker, food security, 80% of farmers in this country, are smallholder, they are peasant farmers, they're the women of this country. They don't belong to big schemes, they don't, and we cannot talk of that being the engine and the driver of food security in this country. So a bill that then blacks out this aspect of informal irrigation and the facilitation of these kinds of women and the peasant farmers and the informal irrigation that should be taking place, and then focuses on just schemes and defines everything through the perspective and the lens of big farms and irrigation schemes like the Kulalus and the Mweas and these kinds of things, then in my opinion misses the point and does not empower communities, does not facilitate food security at the household level. It just has in mind a different, much narrower definition that I would have liked, and I would have imagined this to be. So when you look at the authority that's being established, it talks on, in every, the word scheme, public scheme, scheme is mentioned so many times. I have highlighted, and at every single clause, under Section 8, for instance, where it gives the functions of the authority, from A, B, C, D, E, F, all, name it, D, E, F, every one of those is speaking about all schemes, irrigation schemes, committees at scheme levels, schemes including schemes which traverse and straddle more than one county, supervision of schemes, schemes in consultation. I mean, this is, perhaps if this was brought to this House as the Irrigation Schemes Bill, then we may be able to discuss it. But to call it an irrigation bill and just go and talk about just very narrow definitions of that nature does not really augur well for this House, whose mandate, as has been mentioned by my colleagues, is to protect the lower levels, the county levels, the county governments, and the people that live in those counties. Mr. Speaker, with regards to the counties, again, I have a lot of problem with this bill. It's very condescending and gives all powers to the cabinet secretary and the national level with very little or minimal, and only talks about counties in terms of the cabinet secretary may in consultation. No? So again, I find that this bill, in its form and substance as it stands, does not support counties. It says in Article 14, for instance, each county government may, within its area of jurisdiction, establish a county irrigation development unit for the better carrying out of an irrigation function delegated by the cabinet secretary. Again, I don't believe, I come from the school of thought, first of all, that county governments and national governments are not necessarily a hierarchical relationship, that they are branches, so that when the bill starts talking about the CS delegating to county governments, then I have a big problem with these kinds of role that is assigned to the county government. In respect of land, other than public land in National Public Irrigation Scheme, the Cabinet Secretary shall, in accordance with the law of the time being relating to the compulsory acquisition. Again, land issues in this country are very emotive issues, are actually a time bomb, and we've seen what's happening with land issues. This bill gives so much powers to the Cabinet Secretary, to the national level, with regards to land issues, whereby compulsory acquisitions are given to the national level, to the Cabinet Secretary, and we've seen what is happening with compulsory acquisition. They have so far been done very badly. They have, in fact, bordered on abuse of rights of the people with regards to both our constitution and international law and international humanitarian law. We've seen what's happening in Mau, while we of course support the conservation of our water towers, which absolutely must be conserved. Again, the manner in which the acquisition and evictions and the compulsory acquisition of land has been conducted in this country borders on abuses of the rights of the people, both under international law, under international humanitarian standards, and under our own constitution. So this bill, under the guise of irrigation, is actually giving a lot of leeway for a compulsory acquisition of land under the pretext of irrigation land. In case of community land forming part of a national or public irrigation scheme, again, the Cabinet Secretary on behalf of the department may take the land on lease and on terms to be agreed between the Cabinet Secretary and the county government. Where does that leave the communities? Yet, it's been said here, community land. Therefore, this bill is disenfranchising, both not just through the not taking care of irrigation that is informal, that's in the hands of the communities, but also in terms of the land and land use by communities. It's going to take away not just from the county governments, but especially from the communities, especially in the counties that we come from, where land is held in trust and land is communal. Therefore, this lends itself to a lot of the abuses that have already been meted on communities through compulsory acquisition. So for me, this bill, on many levels, while as I said before, this House is here to make laws, and this House stands for ensuring that legislative frameworks within which our country can be food secure, within which our country can develop, we support and should be what we do on a daily basis. As this stands, in both form, in its letter and in the substance, it has a lot of things that are not right. The impact on legislation on community-based management of water for informal irrigation, as I said, does not even seem to have been captured at all. And so, unless they change this to mean a bill for irrigation schemes to be managed at national level, in which case perhaps it may then pass our scrutiny, as it stands, I don't think this bill is good for counties, is good for communities, and is good for us as this House pass and to append our support to. So for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of issues, and as I said before, with a lot of bills that are coming out of the National Assembly, we may need perhaps a bit more scrutiny, whereby we look at due diligence for their support or for their protection of counties or for their taking away from counties, and whatever little that gains we've made with regards to giving powers to the counties, but also giving power and self-governance and determination of livelihoods by communities, that should be which is the mandate of this House. Mr. Speaker, so on those accounts, both with regards to how this is framed, with regards to just the hierarchical approach and the fact that it's only as delegated by the CS that the counties may be consulted, it's only, and the fact that land issues find themselves here. Of course, irrigation is done on land, and we don't refute that, but again, where community land, county land, and especially with regards to the peasant farmers, where then it's only the issue around compulsory acquisition of land and the rest of it, I have a problem supporting this bill, and I would suggest that we take it back for further scrutiny, or perhaps for changing it so that it just becomes a bill for big national schemes that this country should be taking forward. And perhaps the word food security, I'm not sure, is it irrigation for commercial purposes, or is it irrigation for food security? Because if it's for food security, with 80% of households or farmers being peasant, and therefore this being designed as this big project, so there's a bit of a disconnect for me to support this bill, and therefore I would say that while I support legislation and I support frameworks within which we should develop our agriculture, this one does not have that desired impact for me. So I don't support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Arake. Senator Outa, Kisumu County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to declare my interest that I am a farmer number 351 of West Kano Irrigation Scheme. And Mr. Speaker, before I came to Parliament in 2007, I was the chairman of irrigation scheme of Ahero and West Kano. The time I was coming in as the chairman, the scheme has already collapsed under the mismanagement of the National Irrigation Board. So, Mr. Speaker, I arise to oppose this bill, and I will not support this bill after going through the content. Mr. Speaker, this bill is nothing more but just a transferable concept of naming it the irrigation, what do we call it? The National Irrigation Development Authority from NIB. Mr. Speaker, we must do justice to the people of Kenya if we are serious to protect our people from hunger. In 1974, the concept of National Irrigation Board was born. They had good ideas to promote food security in areas like Kano Plains when they came. My forefathers, who had a huge land where they used to grow cassava, millet, maize, and they will supplement with fish from Lake Victoria. And here was a scheme to deny them the opportunity to control their land under what's called the National Irrigation Board. So, Mr. Speaker, when they came in, they established the National Irrigation Board under the community land, which was a trust. And they agreed with the people of Ahero and West Kano that after a period of time, they will surrender the land after developing it. But, Mr. Speaker, after many years of exploitation by the National Irrigation Board, there was nothing that was good that came out of this establishment. What was found as a result was more people were poor than ever when that irrigation scheme was established. And that's why when I see a bill like this coming in this House, I would stand firm and reject this bill. Mr. Speaker, the National Irrigation Board has done no justice to the farmers of rice growers. There is a lot of money that the government has pumped in, but we realize that year in, year out, the National Irrigation Board would not even take a greater concern to improve even farming methodology. They do not even have agronomists, and yet they call all this irrigation scheme like Ahero Mwea, the National Irrigation Scheme, which was meant to produce food security. There was not even a single agronomist in these schemes. There is no research that could be done to improve the quality of rice where we could be able to compete with this cheap rice that is coming from other countries. There is no any other method of land preparation. So the farmer were left to defend for themselves, and yet people who are given the responsibility to protect the farmers are looting the money from the coffers each year. It was in 2007, 2008 when I came to Parliament, and I was so happy, Mr. Speaker, that the government will be able to improve all our national irrigation schemes. So they came up with a program called Economic Stimulus Program, which was meant to stir and provide the new infrastructures so that the food security will be realized. Mr. Speaker, this money, which was in tune of billions, never lasts for 1 year. After 1 year, it was reported that there was no single grain. There was no improvement of any infrastructure of all this irrigation scheme. The water was still lacking in both Ahero and West Kano. There was no seed provided. There was no fertilizers. And yet 2.6 billion were all squandered. And this is something that has never been asked. Where was this money, where was this money gone to? Mr. Speaker, I will not support this bill because when you look at this bill, even in part 4, it details the services, what the irrigation scheme will do. This is the same thing that we have seen with the National Irrigation Board. And that's why I'm saying this is just a transferable concept to come up with a new name, but on the same mismanagement, just like National Irrigation Board. Mr. Speaker, today, if you could go to my farm in West Kano, under the National Irrigation Board, there is nothing going on. The land preparation cannot be done because the infrastructure which was established in 1974 to date, the NIB has never revisited to be able to levelize them so that when they flood the land, then the water will hold for rice to be cultivated. And that's one thing that we said, the money that comes in each year, they will disappear only here at the national level. There is no any other methods that they introduced that even after harvesting of rice, there will be post-harvesting methods for the farmers. But what makes it worse, Mr. Speaker, we in this country will go outside and import rice from other countries. But the one that are grown in this country, the National Irrigation Board, they have failed to provide how they can be able to buy it from the farmers so that even our schools can be provided with free rice to feed our kids. But yet then you will realize that the cartels in the government now who are coming to change the name from NIB to the authority will find it much more prudent to import rice from other countries. Mr. Speaker, I want to say about this bill that unless it is keenly scrutinized and come up with something that will be able to support the rice farmers in Kenya, Mr. Speaker, I will not support it. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, agriculture is devolved. There will be no need to establish authority in Nairobi, and yet the county governments can be able to take care of all these services that are mentioned in this bill. It is my prayer and trust that we, as the senator in this House, will not interfere with the devolved governments by providing a bill that will deny them a chance to improve on food security. And with those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest that this bill be sent back to where it came from, so that we would be able to think critically and not to establish a new authority, but come up with a bill that will be able to provide this country with food security. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Outa. The bill came from the National Assembly. Is that where you want it returned? Order, Senator. It's good to clarify where you want the bill to go. Order, order. Senator Kirinyaga of Nyeri County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to say a few words about this bill. Mr. Speaker, this country seems to have adopted a new method of giving services to the people. This country seems to think projects that are not talked of in billions cannot work. This body being proposed by this bill, Mr. Speaker, from my point of view, irrigation used to be done in this country. Personally, with Engineer Mohamud here, we were working in the Ministry of Water, and irrigation used to be done successfully during our time. And it was a department within the water sector, because unless you manage water, you cannot do any irrigation. Mr. Speaker, I said one time, you cannot scare poverty by pumping money. If we think by going and throwing a project there, 10 billion, 20 billion, will be the way to end the hunger in this country, it will never work. South Africa has a successful irrigation system. Zimbabwe used to have a successful irrigation system. Egypt. And the method they used to this day are the same method we were using in those years. Therefore, the solution is not these boards. The boards just become top heavy. Where you are managing things, you have a very heavy management, consuming resources, but you don't have the tributaries to do the work. Mr. Speaker, it will require engineers, it will require agriculturalists to do proper irrigation. And let us look at our history. There was a Moya irrigation scheme, there is a Kano Plains. None of them is a success. Mr. Speaker, I was informed the other day by somebody who used to manage Ministry of Agriculture that our rice in Moya is actually aromatic. It is better rice than most other rice you get in this world. Now, people come there, they are buying the rice from some miserable farmers there, and they're trying to mix it up with other rice. Mr. Speaker, we need to look at our policy, the way we are outlining our policy. The other thing I want to caution is, for heaven's sake, counties have not already achieved what they have been asked to achieve. Counties that are not delivering medicines into dispensaries, are they the ones you are saying you give some billions to manage in water? I will not be a party to that decision. Therefore, my view is that can this, instead of having this board or this commission being proposed, could we have this being actually relooked as a department really in the Ministry of Agriculture? Just as it used to be, because it worked. You don't need to invent something new where things worked. Let me say that there is a project down this way in the Galana area. It collapsed. We don't know why it collapsed. But the truth why it is collapsed is because the concept may have been wrong. The truth why it collapsed is because the management was not right. Now, Mr. Speaker, if you have just this so-called board, commission with big titles, big salaries, what is that they will do to reach everybody in this country and to get into every corner of this country, identify small streams that can be made to do irrigations, successful irrigation schemes? They used to be here, Mr. Speaker. The other thing I want to caution is that the solution to our storing even rainwater is not the big, gigantic dams we think. Let us have machineries that used to be here in the former Ministry of Agriculture, available everywhere in this country, where a farmer could go and actually hire an equipment at a reasonable price, go to his farm, identify one or two sites, and their dam is dug, and he can do proper irrigation, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, my feeling is that the concept of this bill, the formulation of this bill is not really well thought. It needs to be looked again because we have a certain amount of resources, and it is these resources that we need to utilize in the best way possible. And I want to say, this top-heavy management. Today, we all remember when we were talking about devolution in this country, we had proposed 10 regions, and we had said, let them be provinces, the old provinces, and they divide the Rift Valley into 2 provinces, divide the Eastern into 2 provinces because of their size, and we would have ended up with 10 regions. That decision was made one evening. The following day when we met, it was thrown away because of other tribal decisions that were to be taken. And we went to what we said, let's go to the old counties, let's go to the old districts and maintain the 6, which Mzee Moi had created. That's how we came with 47 counties. They are top-heavy, such that some counties are spending 80% of their resources into overheads, into maintenance, into personnel, redundant personnel. This is not the way we are going to build this country. Therefore, personally, I don't feel that having the way this bill is formulated is the way to go. It needs to be sent back. Let the drafters, let whoever formulated it, rethink again, and go back to the history of this country. The other day I said we need to retrace our history. Today in America, you hear people quoting George Washington, you hear people quoting Abraham Lincoln, you hear them quoting Roosevelt. We must retrace our history. We had very clear ways that we wanted this country to learn. Let's, for heaven's sake, retrace it. It is and this is what I'm talking about. It is how those earlier departments were created that worked. And Mr. Speaker, I beg that passing this bill is going to be nothing else than adding another load to our already a horse that is too tired, that is struggling to walk. Thank you very much.
Order, Senator. Do you support? Do you oppose?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I have to say it, but if you listen to me, I don't
Order,
support.
Senator.
I
Order,
don't
Senator.
support.
Order, Senator. So you support or you oppose?
I oppose, Mr. Speaker. I would
Very well.
that is taken.
Very well. Senator Wambua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to add my voice to this bill. Mr. Speaker, the history of this bill, or the floor of this House, is very fresh to all of us. Last year, Mr. Speaker, when this bill was brought to the floor of the Senate, during division, it was defeated. And I remember, Mr. Speaker, that time, we were told by the leadership of the honorable senators seated on the right side of your chair that this bill will be taken to the lower house and it will be passed. Sure enough, Mr. Speaker, this bill found its way to the lower house, and word for word, that bill has come back to the floor of the Senate. The Speaker, I did mention last week or 2 weeks ago that I am a linguist by training, and in that training, Mr. Speaker, we call that a slap in the face. A bill that was rejected by this honorable House comes back for debate by the same members. Mr. Speaker, I know the importance of food security in this country. Not now, but that importance has always been there, only that it has been given impetus by the President's Big Four agenda, and I'm calling it the President's Big Four agenda on food security deliberately, Mr. Speaker, because there is no longer clarity on whether there is consensus on this agenda. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I want to state categorically that I oppose this bill. And for reasons, Mr. Speaker. Article 96 of the Constitution gives us, as members of the Senate, a very important role of protecting counties and their governments. Mr. Speaker, in the schedules, the Constitution has devolved functions to county governments, and agriculture is a fully devolved function. Mr. Speaker, whichever way anyone looks at irrigation, it is an agricultural function. This bill, as currently constituted, Mr. Speaker, in spirit and in letter, is not good for counties. And I say that for good reason, Mr. Speaker. I say that because when you look at clause 9 of this bill, the membership to the proposed board of the National Irrigation Board, the National Irrigation Authority, that membership is almost entirely a national membership of the board, and where there is inclusion or suggestion for inclusion of counties, the qualifications for members are stipulated. But for the principal secretaries, it's just supposed to be automatic membership. And as the senators who have spoken before me have asked, somebody is left wondering, what expertise do these principal secretaries bring to this board? Mr. Speaker, this bill is bad for the counties again because, and Mr. Speaker, let this be the one bill that this Senate will stamp its authority properly on real devolution of functions to counties. Mr. Speaker, I am not sure what irrigation takes place in the capital city of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, there is no justification whatsoever to set up an irrigation authority and then go ahead to state that the headquarters of that authority will be Nairobi. At what point, Mr. Speaker, will counties, the 47 of them, excluding Nairobi perhaps, begin to enjoy the real fruits of devolution by hosting and housing some of these authorities, especially where irrigation takes place, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know there have been arguments that county governments have no capacity to undertake irrigation schemes because these schemes are expensive. Mr. Speaker, I want to remind whoever would be harboring those kind of arguments that devolution is not just devolution for the sake of devolution. The Speaker, the law is very clear that funds must follow functions. And so if agriculture is a devolved function, it doesn't make any sense, Mr. Speaker, to concentrate funds in the headquarters in Nairobi, and yet farming is taking place outside the capital center. So on the basis of that argument, Mr. Speaker, I would say, then if counties have no capacity to undertake irrigation schemes because they're expensive, then let us devolve more funds to counties to be able to undertake irrigation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the only good thing that this bill does, it gives an opportunity to the Senate through the Standing Committee on Agriculture to ask serious questions about the use or misuse of public funds in irrigation schemes. Mr. Speaker, a lot has been said about the Galana Kulalu irrigation scheme. That's the most recent, perhaps. But Mr. Speaker, before then, we had the Ola irrigation scheme, where billions of taxpayers' money was pumped in. And today, those schemes, they lie as white elephants. Mr. Speaker, next to Ola and Kulalu Gulalu, there is an irrigation scheme in Mwingi North constituency of Kitui County called Wikiduke Irrigation Scheme, where billions of shillings have been sunk. Farmers and the community have set aside more than 10,000 acres for irrigation. But simply, Mr. Speaker, because somebody did not want to pay electricity bill for the project, that project has stalled. Mr. Speaker, I say the only good thing that this bill does is to give us, as the leadership of counties, an opportunity to open up investigations into how these billions of shillings were thrown to these projects. And Mr. Speaker, then take that opportunity to call things and people by their names. We call corruption by its name. We call thieves by their names. We call mantras by their names, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, lastly, I want to say that because of the failures of the National Irrigation Board, there is absolutely nothing in the change of a name from an irrigation board to an irrigation authority that would make this bill worth even the paper on which it's written. Mr. Speaker, with those remarks, I oppose.
Thank you, Senator Wambua. Senator Wario, Tana River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this chance to add my voice in this bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to oppose this bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, I come from a home of irrigation schemes coming from Tana River County. We have several irrigation schemes in Tana River County. There is the old Hola irrigation scheme, which is in Galole, the Bura irrigation scheme, the Galana Kulalo food security irrigation scheme in Garsen, and also Tarda irrigation scheme in Garsen. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am a farmer number 495 in Hola irrigation scheme. Mr. Speaker, sir, if maybe you look at me, you can say this is not a farmer. I am a very good farmer, having come from Hola irrigation scheme in a village called Ekashirini village in Hola irrigation scheme. I am a farmer number 495. I was brought up in Hola irrigation scheme. I was born there. My father used to take me to these farms early days when I was young. And when my father died, I inherited the farm number 495, which I still live there, and that is my rural home. When I speak about the irrigation scheme, I talk the practical part of it. Having come from there, I know how irrigation schemes are run from when I was young up to date. Mr. Speaker, sir, Galana Kulalo food security, there is no irrigation there. It is just an open land. And the only thing that they do is to hunt the pastoralist communities not to access River Sabaki for their livestock. Those who are given those farms to do food production are no longer there. What was left behind there are just some few people who are busy stopping our livestock from accessing River Kulalo. There is a lot of money which was pumped there. We were told that a very good thing, a better project will be put in place. And we were forced to vacate from that land to go to the upper land of Kone and Asa, just to leave that land for irrigation. And today what is happening there, there is no irrigation taking place there. It's only people there to drive our livestock away from that land. Mr. Speaker, sir, we are very busy creating more lands for irrigation, as the ones which have already been created before are dying. In whole irrigation schemes, there is no scheme there. It is only a farm with these madenge trees coming into bushy and bushy each and every time. Mr. Speaker, sir, for irrigation schemes, we need to get health facilities because there are stagnant waters on those irrigation schemes. There is no health facilities. There is no fresh water, clean, safe drinking water, because there are chemicals which are used in irrigation schemes and also fertilizers. And as a result of that, so many diseases are found in irrigation schemes, and it is good for this bill to have some health facilities stipulated into it, so that those people who live in irrigation schemes will access a good health facilities and also water for their domestic use, which has not been entrenched there. Mr. Speaker, sir, agriculture is fully devolved, and as you can see on this bill, Article 9 of this bill, all those people who manage irrigation schemes come from Nairobi, the headquarters. And this one really denies for those people in irrigation schemes to undertake or to have full authority of what is to be done in these irrigation schemes. And for county governments are very reluctant because the governor will simply tell you that this one is managed by the boards whose head come from Nairobi area. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is high time we say no to this bill. We refer this bill to where it has originated so that they clean and rectify, iron out some few things so that when it comes back here again, we are going to get a bill which will really give us a full meaning of irrigation scheme and will really cater for those people who are living there. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is ridiculous to see those people who are in irrigation schemes are food insecure, because we know this is where crops are grown, and it's our belief that if you see now people coming from those areas are begging for relief food, Mr. Speaker, sir, the full meaning of food production is lost. And therefore, for us to restore back the full meaning of irrigation scheme and what it has entails with is to see now these places really grow crops, and before they sell out their produce to other places, they become food secure themselves. And this one is not so when you go and do research to these people who live in schemes. Mr. Speaker, sir, for those few remarks, I strongly oppose this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Senator Ongeri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to comment on this irrigation bill. What is the purpose of irrigation? Irrigation, what are the instruments that you require to irrigate? You require water. Where does that water come from? Either the surface water, or underground water, or the rain, or the water which has been conserved through dams, through the rainfall, and the roof catchment. So basically, we're talking about resource in the name of water. One of my biggest problems with this bill, Mr. Speaker, is that already in existence within this bill is the Water Resource Authority. And that Water Resource Authority is supposed to function in the same manner that we are trying to create in the irrigation bill, the Irrigation Authority. So from the word outset, from the word go, from the outset, it's quite clear to me that we are trying to create another authority in parallel line with Water Resources Authority. So what are we doing as Senate? Creating a job creation expedition for people to be engaged in jobs when already there is an authority which ought to be usefully engaged in giving advice and support on water usage within the counties and in the national level. I think we're making a big mistake if we do not draw these contradictions that are becoming quite apparent. There is an existing law within the Water Resources Authority, and the whole authority is on the usage of water in this country. We're coming from the back door. We're now, through the irrigation bill, we're creating another irrigation bill authority. What a tragedy. It is a big tragedy, Mr. Speaker, that this House can be used to be a rubber stamp in just creating authorities. So that's one glaring mistake that the National Assembly should have looked at. What are the other prevailing legal mechanisms that we can use to full use? Now, the good thing about the Water Resources Authority, it has understood its own functions. It is devolved up to the village level. We may have some difficulties with the water service boards, but that is something that we can be able to live with and be able to correct through the legislative mechanisms in the various counties, depending upon the usages of water in those counties. So creating another monster, it's a big mistake. And you can see where I'm driving to, Mr. Speaker. Now, going forward, the title is big, and I've already explained why I may not be very happy with that bill. But assuming they will have a look at it. What is the function of the authority? What shall it be? In Article 8, there are a series of functions that they should perform. Develop and improve irrigation infrastructure for national public schemes. When you talk of improving the infrastructure, in any legislative process, you must look at the historical perspective. Where the Garisha program, irrigation, the engineers and the developers, instead of pumping downstream, they were pumping upstream. So what happened to that project? It died a natural death because of wrong engineering specifications. We have the Kano irrigation scheme. We have the Mwea irrigation scheme. At least in Mwea and Kano, you can see some production of rice, good quality rice, coming through these irrigation schemes. But what about the multiplicity of other problems we've created for these irrigation farms? One is the question of the production which is coming out is not very well coordinated. So farmers, the petty farmers, the small farmers who are involved in these irrigation schemes are hardly making their ends meet. The plethora of diseases. I remember when I was in the Ministry of Health, when I was in the University of Nairobi Medical School, one of the issues we had to deal with, one of my research areas was on the new acquired preventable tropical diseases like schistosomiasis or bilharzia for that matter, because of the irrigation schemes within these regions. And the attendant complications that were being noticed in some of these irrigation schemes. Complications of kidney, that's why you see so many people going for dialysis, so many people going for kidney transplants as a result of man-made diseases and man-made complications through so-called irrigation scheme. We have not even sat down to evaluate what are the benefits and what are the disadvantages of these schemes. And if the benefits outweigh the disadvantages, what do we do with the disadvantages which are arising out of those health schemes, irrigation schemes? So that's one element that I want you to look at. And in that 8A, E, in consultation with the Cabinet Secretary for the time being responsible for finance and the county governments raise funds for the development of infrastructure. Now, who has the capacity to raise funds? Instead of wasting money in creating this office, why don't you use nominal money, very small little capital, to empower the county governments to be able to do these programs and only give them the area and the benefit of research, which is allowed. You can have a very elaborate national research laboratory on irrigation programs. And through that research program, you can then be able to give the benefits to the farmers or to the county governments where they can be able to benefit out of those irrigation schemes. Therefore, I will in fact, the proposals of this bill should go and be able to dismantle the whole structure of the bill and only remain, if there is a bill to come to this House, should be the section of the bill that deals with the research programs and innovations for irrigations so that they become as a resource center for providing information to the various county levels to be able to manage their irrigation schemes. I think that will be much more reasonable and much more clearly so. And then G, provide technical advisory services on a commercial basis on irrigation water management. Now, commercial basis, yes. The Galana story is very fresh in our minds. And I think Senator from Tana has clearly expounded the tragedy that we went. For me, I was looking forward to an opportunity to grow this country's GDP by double digits through the irrigation scheme in Galana. But we have had a fiasco there because they could only manage 5,000. And the production cost in that scheme was far greater than the production cost of a peasant farmer in producing that maize. What went wrong? Have we learned the lessons? Now, lest I'm not misunderstood, one of the things I want to really emphasize here, nobody is opposed to creating food security for this country. We are all in full agreement with the Big Four agenda of food security for this nation. But we're now questioning the methodology being put in place through the legislation in this House of securing that food security. That's why we must examine this bill and be able to be satisfied that it will meet the criteria of rendering that food security that we so desire. If I may move fast, Mr. Speaker, K, in collaboration with the county governments and other stakeholders, promote the marketing. Now, one of the biggest problems we're having today, look even at the basic production these days in Trans Nzoia, in Rift Valley, and in Kisii, and in South Rift. Maize production. Today, I can tell you, because I declare my interest, I'm a farmer in Trans Nzoia, we're going to expect a bumper crop. As I'm speaking today, Mr. Speaker, there is maize coming from Uganda, retailing at 1,100 shillings, 90 kg, to 1,500. The cost of production for the farmer in that region is 1,700 shillings. So once you allow this crop, as if that was not enough, the National Cereals Board stores are already full with the so-called maize from traders, commercial traders. Where does the ordinary poor farmer take his crop of 2018, which is coming in another 3-4 months' time? We have already jeopardized the food security of this country by allowing certain cartels to come in and be able to completely distort the market, and therefore giving this disincentiveness to the farmers not to produce any more maize. That's why people are changing from maize production to something else. So if we cannot manage what we get in that irrigation scheme, in the way of maize, in the way of mangoes, in the way of rice, in the way of fish, in the way of other commodities that we may realize from that scheme, it's not going to be possible for us to encourage farmers to go that route, because they have already hit a snag, and it's going to be very difficult for them. Then it looks as if instead of decentralizing, we're nationalizing. Agriculture is basically a function of the county governments. You're only giving 2 representatives in this board from the county governments through the county people. And you are telling Kenyans that we want you to be food secure. And you are telling Kenyans we're going to provide ways and means of producing that food. And you are centralizing this thing, removed far away from farmers, and creating bureaucracies that farmers can never be able to manage. Now, when I come to part 4 of this bill, responsibility of county governments, establish a county irrigation development unit for irrigation. This is what we have had in the irrigation board, which has just been in existence, which was replaced by an irrigation act. We're now bringing in the irrigation act to be able to centralize these things and only create a nominal unit in the county level. Mr. Speaker, when will the counties ever have the capacities to do their own things? When will ever the counties be able to develop the wherewithal resources, technicians to handle very simple things like water resource management? There's already an existing authority which we should use to be able to educate and elevate the activities in the county government. Therefore, the responsibility of county governments cannot be reduced to a mere unit trying to perform a very important and central function of irrigation within that county. And if you look at that E, I'm already on part 4. When I said part 4 is Article 14E. 3E. It says, identify community-based smallholder schemes. It's already marginalized. And you are coming back here telling us, putting very nice clauses, that you are going to identify the smallholder when already the center of decision is being centralized at the national level. Where is he going to have the voice? He has no voice anywhere. You're just telling him, it's nice, we've catered for you, you're already in the bill, but the actual decision-making process is elsewhere. So this is a very misleading clause in this place. And then E of that part says, provide capacity building for farmers and support the establishment of viable farmer organizations. He's not in the decision-making. The reporting center is the authority, the irrigation authority, and then cabinet secretary, and then cabinet, and the next of the thing you see, they are being given orders what to do. There is no input from that farmer. Nothing whatsoever. And I don't think we should be able to go by that way. And on the irrigation services, Article Part 5, Article 15, seek advice of Water Resources Authority on the development of new irrigation water resources. So if you are seeking advice from Water Resources Authority, what business do you have to exist? You have no original ideas of your own. You are now going to borrow another existing authority where the state is paying heavily on that authority, and you want to exist because you want to go and consult with them what you must do. So, Mr. Speaker, all in all, I love the idea of food security. But what is missing is that we are trying to create structures that are draining away the resources from people to people who have fat salaries. We're trying to create services which are centered, nationally centered, instead of being centered at the county levels. So, the short and long of this story, Mr. Speaker, my conscience, I would have liked to see, like in Kisii County or in Nyamira County, we may not have very expansive lands, but I'm sure there will be some other level form of drip irrigation that will be done, like you see what happens in Israel, in small-scale holders. They're able to irrigate their land through drip irrigation. We still have to tighten up this dispute between us and Egypt on the water usage of Lake Victoria waters. 60% of the rivers of waters that run into Lake Victoria come from Kenya. We have not resolved that. The way we've gone around it is that they have come with the innovative way of saying, we'll be able to give you many more boreholes. We are just depleting our aquifers, groundwaters, and we're not making use of our surface water, which goes to waste in many times. Let's look for a much better way. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I oppose.
I now give the floor to the Senator for Uasin Gishu County, Professor Margaret Kamar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to add to the voice of my colleagues in discussing this very important bill. Mr. Speaker, I would like to start by saying the bill, in my opinion, is not sitting well in devolution. Mr. Speaker, we need to ask ourselves, why do we want to do irrigation? Because irrigation is a process of enhancing food production, which means we are only doing irrigation for agricultural purposes. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the Constitution, Schedule number 4, it is very clear that there is only one role that has been given to the national government as far as agriculture is concerned. It is the national policy, the agricultural policy, and in fact the veterinary policy. Everything else is in the county government. And that's why I'm saying this bill is not sitting well with devolution as per the current constitution. What would that then mean, Mr. Speaker? It means that this bill is re-centralizing what was devolved by the Constitution. And this Senate must really look at this bill carefully and check what has been devolved so that we don't re-centralize. Mr. Speaker, what was the reason why we devolved? If you look at the reason for devolution according to the objects of devolution, we were very clear, and Kenyans were very clear on what they wanted to achieve when we created a devolved government system. In Article 174 of the Constitution, sometimes we may be misreading some of the articles. 174 Article B, to foster national unity by recognizing diversity, is one area where we have misread and behaved as though diversity is equal to ethnicity. So we keep talking about diversity as our diverse cultures and our diverse ethnicity without considering the fact that we are actually diverse as far as ecological zones of this country are concerned. So that if we consider diversity of the country, we should also be looking at diversity as far as agricultural zones of this country are concerned. What does that mean? It means that each county will have different agricultural priorities. Some will want to do irrigation, while others will be interested in afforestation. So the diversity, ecological diversity of the country dictates what you should be doing. And as far as I am concerned, these were some of the diversities that we were looking at when we were giving the powers to counties to look at, to promote themselves and to foster their own counties in terms of the diversity, because others will be choosing other things. Some counties, as we are talking now, are very good in mind seriously, and they must be supported as much in the devolved unit. Mr. Speaker, when you look at this bill that has been given to us, Article 6 in Part 2, the development, management, and regulation of irrigation. The Part 2, Article 6(1), the Cabinet Secretary has been given the powers to develop, manage, and regulate irrigation. If you are talking of development of irrigation and management of irrigation, in fact, that is not what a policymaker should be doing. This is execution of irrigation itself. And if that is what this bill is going to give the Cabinet Secretary, it means counties and even farmers will not have the ability to do anything without being regulated at the national government level, regulated by a CS who does not have powers to deal with agriculture except at the policy level. It is therefore very important, Mr. Speaker, that if this bill is to pass, we must change it completely. It must rest under the current constitution, which has devolution, and it must leave out what is not under devolution if we are going to give it to the CS. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, a lot of functions that had been given to the counties is being returned to the CS at this level. And it is not practical. It is not practical for the minister or the CS to develop irrigation systems. Not to mention the fact that I agree with those who have said a national irrigation authority is already past our new constitution. Our new constitution cannot allow that in the current setup. Because if agriculture has been devolved, this should be a county irrigation board. For the counties that are going to embrace irrigation, they must have their own boards that will regulate the water, because you cannot regulate Tana water the way you want to regulate Kerio Valley water. Mr. Speaker, what this bill is also forgetting is that it's forgetting that irrigation is going on now. As my colleague, Honorable Ongeri has said, drip irrigation is going on. We have a lot of drip irrigation going on in our flower farms currently. It's going on in our vegetable farms currently. Herbs for export, they're using nothing but drip irrigation. So a lot of things are going on. It is not recognizing the fact that it is going on. What we need is regulation within the county itself on how to apply irrigation, because it is at the county level that you know the usage of your water according to your streams. Further, Mr. Speaker, the source areas of the water that is being used by downstream communities does not necessarily come from the same county. And it's so it demands that there is an inter-county relationship. In Uasin Gishu, for example, and we do irrigation for vegetables, flowers, and whatever in Uasin Gishu. Our source of water is Elgeyo Marakwet County. So there has to be a relationship between Uasin Gishu County and Elgeyo Marakwet County, where most of the waters start from, where they spring from. So are we saying that the national government is going to move around the country to do what it failed to do before devolution came? Because the failure in the irrigation sector was nothing but the massiveness of the jobs that we are doing. And if we want efficiency, Mr. Speaker, then we must fragment, we must reduce the areas and allow a smaller board, a unit within the unit of the county to manage this for us. So I don't see how, as Cabinet Secretary, shall develop and manage irrigation throughout Kenya. It is not possible. And it is what we were running away from. We were running away from the massive projects that are not run efficiently. We were going towards smaller units, counties as we have chosen, where we can efficiently perform and do our work. So for me, Mr. Speaker, National Irrigation Authority needs to be amended to be a county irrigation board. And we'll introduce that, and we need to introduce that as we amend this bill. The last one, Mr. Speaker, is Part 4, the county government. If you look at Part 4, the role of the county government, again, what has been taken from the county government is being introduced in small doses as though the county governments have no power to do this work, and so they are being given. And in fact, from the outset of that statement, it is a disaster, Mr. Speaker. 14.1, each county government may, within its area of jurisdiction, establish a county irrigation development unit. You may if you wish, you don't have to have it. Individual farmers may irrigate without any control, because the way this bill has been written, it has not been written to take care of the powers that were given to counties in the Constitution itself. Mr. Speaker, I think this bill will be an example in this House of how we should do things in the new dispensation of the new Constitution. I think we should use this bill to distinguish between what was devolved and what was not devolved. If truly we devolved agriculture, we need to manage it at that level. And we know that we will be able to see different efficiencies in different counties. But the regulation and the law pertaining to irrigation, yes, remains in the national government, as was anticipated by the Constitution itself. But when it comes to management of irrigation, when it comes to development of irrigation, Mr. Speaker, I do support that these are areas that must be corrected in this bill so that the county governments can function the way they were set up in the Constitution. With those remarks, I beg to say that a lot of amendments must be put before we put this.
Order. Do you support Senator Hamar, or you oppose?
Support with a lot of amendments.
Subject to amendments.
Yes.
Very well, Senator Kabaka.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir, for giving this opportunity also to hear my voice in this important subject that can transform this nation to prosperity if well articulated. Mr. Speaker, sir, before I proceed to thematic areas of this bill, it's imperative that I also state my disdain for the lower house inability to amend the bill after it was rejected last year by this House. Mr. Speaker, sir, there's this same bill which was previously introduced in the House. When I looked at it from the top, from the bottom, from sideways, left and right, this bill is intact, it's invariant, nothing has been changed. What does that tell you? What does it tell us? It tells us the lower house has no regard to the upper house. If we go by the functions which are well spelled out in Article 96 of the Constitution as to the role of the Senate, among others, subclause B, indeed it is a function of this House to participate fully in the lawmaking functions by considering, debating, and approving bills concerning counties as provided in Articles 109 to 113 of the Constitution. Of course, when we are called to debating, or even considering and approving or even disapproving the bills, which of necessity are not financial bills, we are called upon as men of very high intellectual caliber to interrogate the bill or any bill which is presented at the Senate in any form before we approve the same. We are supposed to look at the content, the context, and even the philosophical foundation of that bill before we approve the same. So of necessity, I submit that, Mr. Speaker, sir, the bill in the form as it is presented, or rather as it is reintroduced this year, there is nothing to debate in the bill of substance. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, the content which was used in that debate last year to see the bill not see the light of the day remains intact. So we need to reiterate the same contents as a whole and reject the bill as it is. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, I stand here today to vehemently oppose the irrigation bill of 2017 for the following reasons. Number one, the NIDA, that is the National Irrigation Development Authority, is improperly constituted and is monolithic skewed towards the National Assembly. Indeed, if you look at the managerial compositions or even its structures, where it is supposed to be horizontal, it is vertical. Why is it vertical? It is vertical meaning including so many stakeholders, the PS in this, the CS in this, the CS in that, and so forth, without taking into cognizance the the county government representation. So this, to me, it is a design, not by default, but it is put there so that the national government, which most of the time acts as a vampire or economic financial vampire to the national cake, to drain the funds which are supposed to devolve directly to the county government, which is now a denial of the spirit of devolution. It has been said, and that is, there's no gainsay about it, that agriculture is a devolved function pursuant to Article 186 of the Constitution. Of course, Article 4th Schedule clearly gives demarcations of agriculture functions where thereunder lies the irrigation function. Is meant to cure food security in the country, then I would say this bill is lopsided because it attempts therefore to take away a well-designated county function back to the national government without attaching the financial benefit to the same. Mr. Speaker, sir, Section 7 of the said draft bill clearly stipulates the seat where the headquarters is supposed to be. It has been mentioned earlier that the seat is Nairobi. Devolved when the Constitution 2010 was promulgated, clearly this objective was very salient, that power was to be decentralized from Nairobi to the rural levels. Mr. Speaker, sir, therefore we are saying these functions should be devolved down to the county headquarters, where the management will be done. It will be a big disservice at the Senator of Machakos, appointed by people of Machakos, if I don't mention some of the intended irrigation schemes. We've had, already we have Yatta Canal, which was supposed to be expanded further. I know the government did did some job, a good job, by cementing the said canal with a view of avoiding percolation of water. But one thing is clear, the canal was supposed to be extended to greater parts of Yatta, Masinga, and even some part of Kitui, so that a lot of water which flows directly to Masinga Dam via Thika River will be captured. So there is a lot to be done by the national government with that regard. But if at all, if that function can be devolved to the counties, I'm sure the county governments of Machakos, while well-funded, will be in a position to give water to so many people who deserve for their own irrigation. There was also the intention that when Masinga Dam was established, over 20 years, in fact over 30 years ago, it has two major functions: to generate power, which it does very well, as holding a reservoir for the other dams downstreams. But of necessity, Masinga was also supposed to give irrigation for local inhabitants. But TADA, which is the body which manages or which owns and manages Masinga Dam, has not only refused to allow the people of Masinga to get the water for irrigation in their farms, but also they have been denied the drinking water. People of Masinga, where the dam resides, have been given raw deal. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm addressing to a professor of international law. And we've had a lot of issues, international legal issues with regard to the Nile Treaty of 1929. I need to add my voice and say that we've allowed a lot of latitude to the Egyptian government, even by invoking environmental diplomacy in resolving the Nile Treaty of 1929. But I would say that, as an historian, that in this agreement, which I've read very well, article by article, there is nothing which prevents Kenya in using Lake Victoria's water. Absolutely. So I think it's high time to educate some of our colleagues who think that the water of Lake Victoria is untouchable. We can use that water. Of course, we should not be cowards when utilizing the water of Nile. You should utilize the water at will, especially countries that borders the Nile waters. Kenya, Uganda, Sudan, both Southern Sudan and Northern Sudan, or rather Sudan, without any fear. Like Professor Ongeri has said, we should not be duped by the government of Egypt by being given some balls here and there. The Nile waters are our natural heritage, an endowment by the Almighty God. If anyone would want to raise maybe some international wars, would stand to be warned. We are not cowards. Mr. Speaker, sir, I need to conclude by saying that a lot has been said about this bill. The bill, as I said, looking on top, at the bottom, and sideways, the contents and the contents of the bill has remained the same, and there is nothing to be debated except to return the bill back to the National Assembly for further articulation. We will be people who are not of sound mind if we are to reject the bill, such an important bill. But we are saying the objectives of the bill is very well articulated, except so many areas which has legal flaws, and that's why we are calling for the promulgators, the promoters of the said bill, to take it back, to be polished, to be articulated, to fit the standard which is capable to be debated by this honorable court pursuant to Article 96, subsection 1B. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I oppose the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kodan Hargura Marsabit.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, no government can claim to be sovereign if it cannot feed its people. And for the last 50 years as Kenyans, we have been having a centralized government where everything was decided from Nairobi. And because of that, very little has been percolating to the rest of the Kenyans who are far from Nairobi, coupled with skewed policies like the sessional paper of 65, number 10, which institutionalized, legislated marginalization in this country. I think it's after 50 years as Kenyans, we decided that we have to legislate, come up with a constitution whose main agenda or main issue is devolution. And we went ahead in Schedule 4 of that constitution, in Article 6 of the Constitution, we came up with 2 levels of government, and we said very clearly the governments at the national and county level are distinct and interdependent and shall conduct their mutual relationship on basis of consultation and cooperation, not one form being subordinate to the other. And we assigned the 2 levels of government their various functions in Schedule 4. This particular bill deals with agriculture, and the Schedule 4 is very clear. In Schedule 4, we Kenyans gave the national government, that is Part 1 of Schedule 4, 29, we just said agricultural policy. Just policy, nothing else. But in Part 2, we started with agriculture as a functions of the county government and said agriculture including crop and animal husbandry, livestock sales, yards, county, abattoirs, plant and animal disease control, and fisheries. So we are very clear on who does what. National government should just be doing policy. Then the actual implementation of that policy should be by the county governments in a way that we are still one government having similar or the same policies, but every county implementing according to its specific needs. Due to climate change, for some of us who come from pastoral areas, pastoralism is now not a sustainable way of livelihood. Neither is even rain-fed agriculture for those who come from those areas or those who practice that. So maybe the best way to go is water-fed or dry area agriculture, and each county will have to implement what is suitable for them because different soils also support different kind of crops. For those of us who are from pastoral areas, we might even be thinking of growing pasture for the animals through these irrigation systems. So once the national government comes up with the policy, we expect the county governments through their assemblies to come up with the specific legislations applicable to food production within their jurisdictions. And that is why we even have county assemblies. So when we come here, sit in Nairobi and come up with a bill like this, which says that it's the CS to come up with the development and implementation of matters agriculture, then especially as the Senate, which is supposed to be serving the interest of the counties, will not be doing justice to our being in this house. We are not representing or protecting the interests of the counties. We are just giving back the interests or the duties of the counties to the national government. It was my hope that counties, as they are required, are supposed to normally come up with their own county integrated development plans, in which, for that 5-year period, they will have captured what they intend to do. And annually, they will be developing their budgets and annual plans from that integrated plan. So it is something which was taught at that level. Of course, food production will be central in that development plan. And if now we sit here and say that we have to come up with a national irrigation authority, which has to run day-to-day agriculture issues, because this bill says that once you have the bill in place, if you look at the bill, Section 3, subsection 2 says, upon the commencement of this act, no irrigation development may be carried out in Kenya otherwise than under this act. So everybody all the 47 county governments have to follow what is in this act, and this act gives all the powers to the CS dealing with irrigation, because in Part 2, Development, Management, and Regulation of Irrigation, all the powers are given to the CS. And this CS may not even be CS water, because as we have been told before, we have observed that irrigation itself oscillates between water and agriculture depending on who is making the decision. So if irrigation is in agriculture, then even matters water will be determined by CS agriculture. Because it talks of the CS will have powers and duties in relation to irrigation and drainage, including water harvesting and storage for irrigation. That is a water department function. But we are giving it to a CS who might even be CS agriculture. And to make it worse, the kind of powers we give to that CS is that even counties, instead of coming up with their own irrigation schemes, the bill even defines a small irrigation scheme to be 100 acres and less. Anything between 100 and anything above 100 is medium, up to, I think, about 3,000. So even a county cannot sit down and say, this part, we can try this. We can, if it's from an arid area, we can say we can do growing of pasture by irrigation. You have to get a license from the CS for any scheme. The CS is supposed to monitor and enforce the conditions attached to the license. The national government could not even monitor, leave alone licenses of irrigation and all that. Even licenses of dams, that is why we have the Solai tragedy, because the Water Resource Management Authority and all that could not monitor. Now you're coming up with another authority to monitor irrigation, small-scale irrigations. You're literally introducing a lot of bureaucracy whereby we cannot move. We have given the counties the authority to run their own agricultural affairs, and now we are saying that even a small scheme of 100 acres, you cannot start without a license from the CS based in Nairobi, and he's the one to be monitoring that. And in fact, the bill says we must have parallel systems. The authority will have its officers even up to the sub-county level. This is a county government function, and you are putting some parallel systems whereby it will just be causing for conflict because county government will want to do their own things, and you're having your staff up to the sub-county level. So, Mr. Speaker, the bill as it is not in the interest of devolution, is not, actually is denying Kenyans in a very critical sector what they wanted to do for themselves. The Constitution talks of public participation. Everything we have to consult the public. We have to do our own decision-making at the county level. We have to do implementation at the county level. But now, when you take an important sector like fruit production, create an authority whose composition from what the bill is proposing, 10 members, all of them basically from the national government, because we are told there are two to be proposed by COG, Council of Governors. How? They propose to the CS, then to be approved by the president. That is not a representative of the county government. That's still a national government individual. Because if you are to have your own representative, then you don't have any other roadblocks again. It should be the county government proposing, that person will directly sit on that without going through any other vetting or any other approval. But now, the COG just submits the name to the CS, and of course, by nature, if you are submitting, you're not submitting two names. Otherwise, that CS will not just be a conveyor belt. You'll be submitting maybe 4 names, he will choose the ones he wants. So it will be a national government representative. So the county governments, who are actually the ones who are responsible for food production, because agriculture is a county government function, will not have any credible representative of theirs. Credible in the sense that it's somebody they have trusted and they are put on that board. Even whatever the Council of Governors is proposing has to go through some other levels, a CS, then President to approve. So it cannot be a county government representative. So basically, Mr. Speaker, this bill is not in the interest of devolution the way it is. We cannot tell the county governments this is your responsibility, then we say nothing happens in this irrigation sector except according to this act, an act which gives all the powers to our board, to our CS, and the county governments have to, even the worst of it all. Mr. Speaker, if you look at part 4, which talks of the functions of the county government, the responsibility of the county government in this bill, or in the matters irrigation, it says that each county government may establish within its area of jurisdiction, establish a county irrigation development unit for the better carrying out of the irrigation function. You're already legislating for the county government on how to do its functions. I can remember when you were doing public participation for the roads bill during the last parliament, when it said that even for the conditional funds, the roads maintenance fund, which are strictly under the Kenya Roads Board Act for the roads maintenance levy, whatever goes to the county government, there was a proposal that at that level, at the county level, let them have a unit within the infrastructure department there for road maintenance. Something which is natural. You cannot do road maintenance if you don't have that unit. But the governor said, no, you cannot legislate for us. We know how to do our legislation, our functions. We can legislate at the county level. So now here we are seated legislating for the county government that they need to have a unit. Irrigation, agriculture is a function for the county government. So by nature, they must have that unit, but we don't need to legislate for them. Then we go ahead and say that to carry out irrigation functions delegated by the county secretary, through as may be prescribed in the regulations. So the county government is forming a unit to perform functions which will be delegated to them. And by delegation, I think it means that it's not their function, it's the function of the CS who is now delegating the governor to do some work. But the governor has been given, or the county government has been given, that right under the 4th schedule of this constitution. Now we are putting the county government even below even that authority. You form an authority here, then you put the county government below that authority to be delegated works by the CS. That is belittling the constitution, and whoever maybe drafted this should have known that the way to go should be to give the counties powers to make their own decision on how best to serve the residents of that county in terms of food production. The government should be very clear in coming up with policies. We, the livestock keepers, have no policy. We have the tea policy, the coffee policy, other crops policy, but specifically livestock. What is there right now is only for the big ranchers. Those who are pastoralists, we are just told that's just a way of life. 50 years, the government has not come up with any policy for that. That's what she'll be concentrating on, not going into implementation of small irrigation schemes of 100 acres. You are told you cannot come up with a 100-acre irrigation scheme until you get a license from a CS. So I think some parts of this bill might even be unconstitutional if you look at it that way. So, Mr. Speaker, if we are to come up with a bill, then it should be specifically policy issues. There are many policy issues lacking in this country, especially concerning livestock production. We have been thinking of coming up with disease-free zones. If it's not possible to do the disease-free zones, then we have some way of maybe controlled quarantines so that people who rely on pastoralism can export their animals through policies which will enable them to meet the standards by which they can export. But nobody is talking of that. We are still struggling on who should license 100-acre irrigation. So, Mr. Speaker, based on those issues, I'd like to say that yes, we need to have a bill on how the national government should execute its agricultural policy function, but not a bill like this. And if it's the way it is, I oppose.
Senator Okongo Mugen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, from the onset, want to say that I rise to oppose this bill for the following reasons. Mr. Speaker, record will bear me witness that the bill that is before the House is the same bill that was before the Senate, that was debated and rejected by the Senate. Mr. Speaker, under the new constitution that we enacted in 2010, Chapter 6 has a clear chapter touching on issues dealing with leadership. And Mr. Speaker, as senators, we must ensure that whatever we do, we don't bring disrepute to this honorable House called the Senate. Mr. Speaker, under Article 73 of the Constitution, the decisions that we pass as the Senate must bring honor to the nation and dignity to the office of Senator. Mr. Speaker, the decisions we make also must promote public confidence and demonstrate integrity in the offices that we hold. And Mr. Speaker, it also must demonstrate respect for the people that we represent in this House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will have negated all those responsibilities of leadership which are captured in Chapter 6 of our Constitution, more specifically Article 73. If we as a Senate can reject a bill 6 months ago, and then the same bill is brought to us for consideration, and then we pass it. So, Mr. Speaker, if not for anything, for that simple reason that our views as a Senate have not been taken into consideration to improve this bill, even a 10% improvement, that is ground enough for us to reject this bill. But, Mr. Speaker, even if that was to be disregarded, Mr. Speaker, this bill is utterly unconstitutional, and it wants to claw away from the gains of devolution. And, Mr. Speaker, it's a classical case of a national government that wants to operate and proceed as if Kenya never enacted a new constitution of 2010 that creates two levels of government. One is the national government, and the other one is national government. Mr. Speaker, under the fourth schedule of our Constitution, Part 2, agriculture is a devolved function of county government. Issues dealing with water and sanitation is a function of county government. And Mr. Speaker, when people are speaking about diseases in areas where irrigation schemes are conducted, we are dealing with sanitation. And these are responsibilities that the people of Kenya have passed over to the county governments, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, you cannot divorce irrigation from agriculture. When you're talking about irrigation, you're basically talking about agriculture, because you're talking about farming, improving farming productivity, improving crop husbandry, and that's why when we talk about agriculture, the definition in the Constitution is clear. It says agriculture includes crop husbandry. So there is no way the drafters of this Constitution can try to be ingenious and disregard a very clear mandate of county governments. And under Article 96 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, our main role as senators is to protect devolution. And if we pass a bill that clearly wants to take away functions of county governments, we would have failed miserably, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, if not for any other second reason, the fact that this bill wants to eat into functions of our county governments is ground enough for this House, as the Senate, to reject this bill. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, I've never seen a bill that is drafted in a very simplistic manner. The approach given by the drafters of this bill is very simplistic. Mr. Speaker, the drafters of this bill cannot think on any innovative ways of doing irrigation other than the traditional large-scale irrigation schemes, the likes of Mwea and the likes of what we have in Ahero. But Mr. Speaker, if we have to look for food security in this country, if we have to improve productivity of our small-scale farmers, then we must be broad in our approach to what we perceive to be irrigation. And Mr. Speaker, the point this Senate needs to send back to the drafters of this bill is that irrigation includes empowering the small-scale farmer, the poor woman, Mr. Speaker, who must increase her income, who must be empowered, Mr. Speaker, to do irrigation in a small farm that can lead to high productivity of whatever farming that farmer is undertaking, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I am talking about that poor farmer, Mr. Speaker, many of the poor farmers I'm talking about, these are our women of this country, whom we want to empower economically, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, a proper bill should not have this, very simplistic definition of what irrigation is, saying irrigation means any hydraulic engineering process. I mean, that is really offensive to the poor farmers in our counties. We all know, and this does not require anybody to go to school in this field. We all know, Mr. Speaker, that when you speak about irrigation, we have drip irrigation. That does not need what this drafter is calling hydraulic engineering process. It does not need that. We know we have sprinkler irrigation. It does not need what is being called hydraulic engineering process. People have even gone to the level of having solar-powered irrigation. And all these have been left out of this bill because the drafters of this bill are enemies of devolution. They're just looking at the big, large-scale irrigation schemes that were being run by the National Irrigation Board. So for that reason, we as senators should reject this attempt by the national government to disregard the people whom we represent, Mr. Speaker. Because, Mr. Speaker, if those categories of people undertaking irrigation by means of drip irrigation, sprinkler irrigation, solar-powered irrigation are taken into account in this bill, then the people I represent from the county of Nyamira would have been covered through the irrigation bill. But if we adopt this bill, it means I don't care about the small farmer in the counties I come from of Nyamira and where my friend Senator comes from. And those are the people we represent. And Mr. Speaker, I was, expecting the drafters of this bill to be innovative and to be sensitive to address the problems that these small farmers who want to convert their 3 acres into a viable farm that can produce high-yielding vegetables, high-yielding fruits that will not only improve the food security of this country, but will also increase their income. I expected this bill to address issues of financing these small farmers in purchasing these small irrigation machineries so that they can do proper farming helped by irrigation. But Mr. Speaker, it seems the drafters of this bill don't even understand the challenges that our farmers are facing. They don't understand. They just think that talking about irrigation is having at the back of their mind more irrigation scheme. That is not the thing. We are losing the point, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the farmers who represent the small-scale farmer who wants to do irrigation is having a serious problem on lack of financing. They see that people can have a small flower, how do we call them? These houses that people use nowadays to do farming, but they can't afford to have those houses in their farms. And these are the people we need to address. There is lack of support services to these farmers. I thought that this bill will be addressing an issue where counties will be obligated to have support services to the farmers who want to undertake irrigation in their small farms. This is not being addressed, Mr. Speaker. I was expecting this bill to address an issue of having county-based engineers, experts in irrigation, who can have agricultural extension services to farmers so that they train them on how they can move away from the traditional means of farming and adopt the more modern irrigation-based farming using their small farms. That is the only way, Mr. Speaker, we can proudly say that we are fighting for the interests of our counties, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, who does not know, Mr. Speaker, that the National Irrigation Board has failed miserably? So we cannot, if we are looking for solutions, the national government is not the solution. The solution should be in our county government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you talk to the farmers from where? Irrigation. And I was in a funeral 2 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, and I stopped to buy rice in Mwea. And the farmers there, I was asking them, how do you guys manage? You have been farming rice all this time. They said they were abandoned by National Irrigation Board many years ago. They are now managing those irrigation schemes themselves. So what is this obsession that we cannot undertake irrigation till and unless we pick permanent secretaries from ministries based in Nairobi to go and manage irrigation in our counties? That is not the way to go. That is not the way we can have food security for this country, Mr. Speaker. The people who are in counties can manage these irrigation schemes and irrigation farming on their own, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we have 21 ministries in this country. And I've looked at this bill, the people who are proposed to be in the board, Mr. Speaker, just to see how insultive somebody can be. The ministry in charge of devolution, you'll be shocked, Mr. Speaker, the ministry in charge of devolution has been left out of this bill. We have named ministries of treasury, I don't know, ministry in charge of the principal secretary, Department of Irrigation, principal secretary responsible for agriculture, principal secretary for the time being responsible for water services. But the key link, the Ministry of Devolution, has been left out under Clause 9. And that should tell you that the people who drafted this bill don't care about devolution. Their mentality is about national government. Because how dare you leave out the minister in charge of devolution out of a function that deals with counties? Mr. Speaker, the other reason why I'm opposing this bill is that there is an attempt by the cabinet secretary to micromanage counties. To micromanage counties. And Mr. Speaker, if you look at Clause 6, Mr. Speaker, it says that the cabinet secretary shall develop, manage and deregulate irrigation throughout Kenya. That's micromanaging. I mean, what tells this cabinet secretary that the county governments cannot manage and regulate irrigation in their counties? They have the capacity. They can do it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what is this obsession that anytime we want to create boards, we must mention particular ministries? Why can't we say that in Tana River, where we have the largest irrigation schemes, why can't we mention by name that the governor for Tana River will be sitting as a member of this board? Why can't that be the case? Why must we mention particular ministries, but we don't want to mention particular counties of interest, Mr. Speaker? If you read clause 14, Mr. Speaker, it says that the cabinet secretary will delegate irrigation functions to the counties. What a joke, Mr. Speaker. What a joke, Mr. Speaker. How can a cabinet secretary be delegating functions to county governments? Mr. Speaker, that is not the way to go. The best way, Mr. Speaker, that we can make Kenyans to enjoy the fruits of devolution is by empowering our governors and appreciating the problems that we face as a nation and look for solutions that are geared towards addressing those challenges, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, one of the challenges we face, we know that Kenya, 80% of this country does not receive adequate rainfall. That is a documented fact. And that 80%, that's where our counties are, Mr. Speaker. We know, Mr. Speaker, that the remaining 20% receives erratic rainfall throughout the year. And another factor, Mr. Speaker, is that we need to ensure that we have food security in this country, Mr. Speaker. Another fact, Mr. Speaker, is that we have so many peasantry farmers in this country whom we need to empower and increase their level of farm production and allow them to engage in high value return farming so that they move out of poverty. The attention should never be to the traditional irrigation schemes which have been there and which have not been successful. Mr. Speaker, the irrigation scheme in Ahero. I drove through Ahero on last Friday. You don't see any activities going on there. That tells you that the national government has literally abandoned those irrigation schemes. And what does that tell us as leaders? It tells us that the national government lacks the capacity. It lacks the capacity to manage those irrigation schemes. And if that be the case, then we need to look for a solution that is outside that traditional approach that we have had for several years since independence, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another point, Mr. Speaker, and I've said this several in my contribution, Mr. Speaker. This idea of suspicion between the national government and the county government is something that this Senate should not condone. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution is very clear that we have two levels of government and that these two levels of government shall be interdependent and they shall collaborate with each other. So even if the government wants to assist the county governments in issues dealing with irrigation, they should first appreciate that this is a function of county governments, but they can work in collaboration. It should not be the other way around, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, because of time, I want to conclude by saying, Mr. Speaker, that this Senate should not play small, Mr. Speaker. Our playing small will not help this country. Whether this bill was passed by the National Assembly, we as Senate have a constitutional obligation to reject it if it does not serve the interests of the counties that we serve, Mr. Speaker. We are not flower girls, Mr. Speaker. We are not here to rubber stamp what the National Assembly has passed, but we are here to ensure that each and every bill that we pass serves to protect devolution. And since this bill does not serve that purpose, we must reject it. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Mary, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for also giving me a chance to add my voice on this bill. But before I add my voice to the National Assembly Irrigation Bill 2017, I first want to wish I wish to confirm my stand and support the initiatives of the government to conserve and protect Mau Forest. As a delegation from Kajiado County, we wish to say that we shall support the initiative of the government to conserve not only Mau Forest, but all other catchment areas to protect our country water bodies. We cannot as a country talk about food security without water. We cannot talk about manufacturing as an agenda. We cannot talk about housing as an agenda without water. And therefore, I want to say as a county and as a people from Kajiado, we want to support the government initiative. I want to, Mr. Speaker, sir, come to the bill, and I want to say from the onset that this bill is unconstitutional, and it is one of those bills that does not recognize the role of constitutional bodies, like the county governments, the county assemblies, which are mandated to do regulations for running of policies concerning counties. It doesn't also recognize the mandate of Senate, which is to protect the interest of counties. This bill, Mr. Speaker, sir, is intending also to duplicate the work of different governmental agencies, like the National Irrigation Board, which has always been there. It's just doing duplication of roles. There is no need of us baptizing some old governmental institutions. Maybe what we could have been doing by law is to look into where they failed, where there is a gap, and where we can give more strength rather than baptizing them. This bill also seeks to sideline the county government in terms of developing irrigation water sources. Mr. Speaker, sir, if you may allow me to read. This bill through the authority through the Water Resource Authority is putting strategies to develop new irrigation water sources, including water harvesting, floods control, storage for irrigation. The bill also is putting appropriate arrangements on intercatchment transfers of irrigation water in consultation with county government and water resources. So this bill is denying county governments the capacity and the authority of looking at what sources of water can they develop. What capacities do they have? We have counties with seasonal rivers. We have counties that have permanent rivers. We have counties with big pieces of land where they can develop dams. But this bill is still giving the National Irrigation Authority a mandate to go into developing these water sources for the counties and even giving licenses. Mr. Speaker, this bill is also through the Cabinet Secretary in consultation with the National Land Commission, the board and the county government, by notice in the Kenyan Gazette, can designate an area of land and offer a license of an area to be developed as a water resource for irrigation. A very simple thing that our counties can do. You still have to go for a license from the national government. At the same time, this bill is also giving the authority and the Cabinet Secretary a right to acquire lands through this board for irrigation purposes, which is a very, very dangerous move. We are trying to bring back again the colonial days where we used to have a mandate of the national government just going and telling people, move from here, we want to do this project for you. So this bill is unconstitutional, and this bill is also disempowering counties, because I don't see how a county government can allocate money to do a project that is being designed, managed, monitored, and evaluated by the national government authority. So it's also going to disempower our counties, and therefore I want to urge the committee at its committee stage to make sure that they've looked into this bill. If it is intended to address policies for irrigation, that I agree, and let it be a national irrigation bill which addresses only policies, because that one is in the Constitution. And we then come up with an irrigation bill for counties, that we shall not have a conflicting mandate, and it will have done the right thing according to the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, sir, because of...
Order, Honorable Senator. Senator, Merit Senator, you will have a balance of 11 minutes next time when this order comes to discussion. Honorable Senators, it is now 6:30 p.m., time to interrupt business of the Senate. The House therefore stands adjourned until tomorrow, Wednesday, 25th June 2018, at 2:30 p.m.